The Depression didn't help things much. We had a fellow who was president by the name of Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover saved the world after World War I. He went all over Europe. He rebuilt countries. He rebuilt economies. He rebuilt everything. He was adored. He was beloved. He became president in 1929. And that's when the stock market crashed. He was a self-made man. He built himself up. And so he felt that since he did it himself, you can do it yourself too. Didn't happen that way. People wanted help. He wasn't ready to help. He basically set up legislation to help people so they can help themselves. It was a disaster. It got worse and worse. The banks closed. People were thrown out of their homes. People lived in shanty towns, which they started to call Hoovervilles. By 1932, Hoover was despised and hated. In 1932, the economy of the world was handicapped. And it turns out that in 1932, the candidate that ran against Herbert Hoover was also handicapped. Franklin D. Roosevelt was in a wheelchair for much of his adult life. Nobody knew that. It's interesting. It's fascinating how the press has changed. There was a gentleman's agreement in the press that FDR would never be shown getting out of a car, never be shown in his wheelchair. And yet, this man was able to change the United States and, in many respects, much of the world. And I think that's a wonderful, wonderful thing to see. Sometimes we look at handicaps as something that can push us back, to not allow us to succeed. And I think one of the greatest examples, to show that you can do something is FDR. He did incredible stuff. He had polio. He was basically without any strength in his legs. But that's not where your strength is. Your greatest strength is between your ears. Remember that. Always keep working that muscle right here, okay, until you die. Very, very important. He came up with a whole series of policies called the New Deal. Now, much of the New Deal was showmanship rather than actual help. But see, the whole thing is if you can give the impression of leadership, that's the first beginnings of a success. Because Herbert Hoover was a great leader, but he didn't know how to talk to people. When he would give a speech, he would hold a paper in front of him and say, and now we're going to do. That was about as exciting as a root canal. FDR talked. He talked to you. He had radio chats. He called them fireside chats. He inspired confidence. In his inauguration address, he said, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." Very important, because fear is nothing. He set up a whole series of things called Social Security, bank aids, work programs. All these things started to move the economy. But to be truly honest, they helped. But what got the United States out of the Great Depression was World War II. Because that got the economy going again because of war work. Unfortunately, many, many recessions and panics are often followed by military conflicts. You see it through our history.